From the brave roots of our founding, to the unstoppable force of American ingenuity, to the sacred inheritance of freedom we must protect, this is our legacy. Join investigative journalist Lee Smith on Roots, Rights, and Reason, powered by America's Future.
Hi, I'm Lee Smith. Welcome and thanks for joining us for this new episode of Roots, Rights, and Reason. This week, we're asking a question that cuts to the heart of the modern world. Why, after so many failures, is communism still with us? Why won't it just die? When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Americans understandably believed we had defeated communism once and for all. But today's guest argues that what disappeared was a communist state, not communist ideology. The struggle that began with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 continued, changing its methods, its language, and sometimes its location. The Cold War, as it turns out, was just one phase of a much larger ideological conflict. The Soviet Union is no more, but the Chinese Communist Party governs the world's second largest economy and possesses enormous military, technological, and economic power. Beijing represents not merely a conventional geopolitical rival, but the most powerful surviving embodiment of the communist ideological tradition. Communism has always understood itself as an international revolutionary project. It was never going to stop at Russia or China or Cuba. It seeks to transform all societies, including our own. Indeed, as leader of the free world, the U.S. has been communism's top target for over a century. Thus, Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist ideas have migrated into Western institutions and influenced contemporary movements in our political and cultural institutions, including education, technology, and political identity. And that's why communism can't be defeated just through military superiority, economic sanctions, and technological competition. We have to recover confidence in our own civilization and individual liberty, political liberalism, free expression, constitutional government, and the Western tradition from which those principles emerged. Our guest today is Bradley Thayer, an American Freedom Alliance Fellow and a founding member of the Committee on the Present Danger, China. His new book is America's 100 Years War, How to Win Against Communism. Brad Thayer, welcome. Tell us, after so many failures, why does communism still exist? Why won't it just die?
Hi, Lee. Great to join your audience and you today. That's a great question. And Orwell anticipated this a little bit in 1984 when he wrote and had Winston Smith, of course, the protagonist in 1984, write in his diary that he understood how the party operated, but he didn't understand why the party was doing what it was doing, crushing humanity. So that's it exactly. Lee, I think there are two parts to the answer. The answer is, for die-hard communists, it offers a promise of totalitarian control, a small elite who are going to be in power, a Leninist elite who sees power in the Bolshevik Revolution, for example, in 1917. So there is that promise for the die-hard communists. At the mass level, Lee, why does communism continue to generate support? Well, I think that gets to human nature. I think that a lot of folks abide or listen to the promises made by communists, taking from the haves and giving to the have-nots, for example, and that's very appealing at every age, but perhaps particularly when you're young and you see injustice. Second element that also speaks to the human condition is a hatred of those who have more, a desire for revenge or hatred to tear down an order which is oppressing or which is perceived to oppress you. So there's the promise that the communists give that they're going to destroy everything. They're going to destroy the old order and replace it with a paradise, a new element. And then thirdly, also that gets to elements of the human condition, a naivete about politics. Believing promises of the creation of a paradise, the entering of a millenarian age where all injustices are going to be swept away and people are going to live in harmony and together. So at the elite level, it's certainly driven by power and a desire for totalitarian control. I think at a mass level, at a popular level, it's a complicated answer
I've come to think more and more, as we look at what's happening in New York, and we look at the Democratic Socialists of America, as we look at the different candidates that they're running, for office in Washington D.C. as well as local and state offices. And people say, well, why has socialism become so popular again? And I've come to think more and more. It's in the second, when you were describing why it appeals to the masses, it's more and more in the second category, that people see it as an instrument to attack and to destroy their enemies, right? No matter who their enemies are, it's a part of that. It's how to weaken people and how to take some sort of revenge by you taking their property or their money, or you're humiliating them. And I mean, I wonder if that's something that's changed, or if there used to be more people who are like, no, communism is dreamy and wonderful and everyone will be fed and everyone will be taken care of. Or to what extent people have said, yeah, we actually don't believe that. If I believed that, I would, I would be living in I would choose some other fantasy. What it's really good for is it's good for taking from them and giving to us.
And smashing an old order and Western civilization, which is the point of the Bolshevik intent, Lenin's intent to destroy everything, including Western civilization. So I think that Lee is right, that there is that desire to break the old and generate a system, even though theoretically it doesn't work. I mean, in terms of the political theory, it's madness and incomprehensible. And then empirically, everywhere it's been tried, it's ended in blood and tears. Right. So the evidence, theoretically and empirically, is overwhelming. And when folks realize that communists have killed over 100 million people worldwide since 1917, that should create an element of caution.
But you're right when this is fascinating because the question that not that you're answering, you're making me think about something. The question that people often ask is, look, it's how we started. Look, it doesn't work. Why do people still like communism? Well, empirically, it doesn't work, right? It breaks orders. That's what it does. But it satisfies certain important human needs. Not everyone shares these needs, but some people do. We look at the Cultural Revolution in China. It's like, oh my goodness, that is just horrible. These young kids, these, the Red Guard going around like shooting people and humiliating their elders. And like, well, unfortunately, that actually satisfies the needs of some people.
It does, and particularly the tyrannical leaders, right, like Mao Zedong, who are employing those Red Guards, for example, or Antifa on the streets of Portland or Minneapolis, St. Paul today to serve their ends as well. So it preys upon the naive, it preys upon those who want a dramatic change and who don't understand or appreciate what they have as a society. However imperfect, it's far better than the tyranny that's inevitable when you choose a communist road.
If I can ask you, your book is fantastic. Congratulations. It covers so much territory. I guess if you can explain the fundamental differences between Soviet communism, Chinese communism, and then I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit. What would a real American communism look like? How would that differ from Soviet and Chinese communism?
Well, that's an important question, Leah. I start the book with an explanation of Leninism, because Lenin is the guy who did it, and his Bolshevik colleagues. He took Marx and Engels' theory, and he was also contributed greatly to that theory, as well as empirically. This is a man of action, who seized in a coup d'etat really power in Russia. He was also a genius at political warfare. He understood that things could not just stand in Russia. You had to spread the revolution. So he created the Communist International. And the point of the Communist International was to spread the revolution by creating communist parties around the world, including in China. The Chinese Communist Party was created in 1921, which is the same year that the Comintern basically creates the American Communist Party in the United States, as well as around the world. So the Comintern is a critical element, really, of how the Bolsheviks spread their power. The Soviets, of course, were defined by tyranny, and so was Mao's the Chinese Communist Party, which is still tyrannical. Whether it was Soviet or whether it's Chinese, you get the same outcome, which is a tyranny. Deng Xiaoping, of course, opened China in a way that Mikhail Gorbachev tried to do but failed in the Soviet Union. Deng Xiaoping was supremely successful, Lee, as you well know, in making Wall Street his partner, in allowing investment, allowing manufacturing in the People's Republic of China, and then taking that money and buying, if you will, influence in American universities and colleges, on Wall Street, in the media. Now, how would it exist in the United States?
Yeah.
Well, it still would be tyrannical, right? It no matter whether it's going to be a Soviet variant or a Chinese variant or an American variant, it's still ultimately Leninism. And Leninism rules by terror. At the end of the day, communists rule by terror, the threat of violence and violence, whether that's in Beijing or Moscow, or whether that, heaven forbid, would be in Washington, D.C. So there's no flirting with it. It's the devil, right? You don't want to get near it because it is going to corrupt you inevitably. And there's no socialism with a human face, like we used to talk about in 1968 with Dubček's revolution in Czechoslovakia. It was crushed by the Soviets, and there's no alternative. This would be tyrannical in America, as it has been everywhere else. And you see in North Korea, or you see in communist China, or you see in Cuba today, where those remnants exist.
One of the things that we're hearing people talking about, especially regarding New York City and the mayor there, Zoran Mamdani, people are talking about, well, we've spoken about the red-green alliance for a long time. That is between communists and between Islamists. Does this recipe work, or are they bound to clash enough so that effectively there's a poison pill that neither Islamism nor communism will be truly relevant in the United States so long as these two forces are united, because they will eventually clash? Or is this hybrid something that's unique to the United States, and we should be terrified of?
Well, certainly we should be terrified of it, to my mind. I see in the red-green coalition, of course, it's incomprehensible. The communists, of course, are atheistic, fiercely atheistic, and Islamists, of course, advocates of Sharia, or the reverse, clearly. The red allowed the green into the United States. And that's why, to my mind, the communists are the far more formidable threat, because the communists control what I call the ideas industry. Our educational system, K through 12, our colleges, universities, our media are heavily influenced by that element. Also, our immigration policy. It was a period when the United States opened its borders, clearly, in the wake of 9/11, for example. And then, of course, in the Biden administration, we've had many tens of millions of people enter the United States. Who would do that if you love the United States of America? Well, if you understand Lenin's, the Bolshevik aphorism, the worse the better, that makes a lot of sense. By the worse the better, the Bolsheviks meant they wanted to make things worse. They wanted to destroy Russia. They didn't want to support the Russian army. They didn't want to support even the Russian people, so that revolution would be advanced. So the Reds let the Greens in and think that they're going to be using the Greens as a battering ram against American identity.
Hmm.
That's how I see that situation. It's very dangerous. Both the red and the green are supremely dangerous. And with this marriage of convenience, however temporary, because it is a temporary arrangement, that makes them even a more formidable threat. Lee, as we're seeing in Michigan, for example,
Mm-hmm.
with the candidate Democratic candidate for Senate in Michigan, as we're seeing in Colorado, we're seeing obviously in New York. It is becoming, if you will, almost on trend, right? It's becoming very popular to nominate for the Democratic Party to nominate these types of candidates. And it really shows how precarious the situation is for the United States and for the survival of our constitutional republic.
So you think that communism is a more powerful force than Islamism? I guess that the what I'd forgotten before is that we also saw something of a combination like this in Iran during their revolution, and the communists were involved with that, and then the communists lost. They lost on the streets to the Islamic Republic,
Yes.
Hezbollahis. So, but you think generally here in the United States, the communists have a more significant base of support?
Well, I think that they're extremely influential in media, in the ideas industry, Democratic Party, and that makes them, of course, the more significant threat to my mind, as President Trump has been calling out in his Truth Social posts, really for the last 2 months now, where he's been calling attention to the danger of communism. And you see on July 3rd, of course, Lee, your audience may remember the speech that President Trump gave at Mount Rushmore.
Yes.
And twinning that with the speech that Mondami gave in New York City that morning.
Right.
President Trump, of course, gave that full-throated, essentially embracing the United States and explaining the importance of the Declaration of Independence and American Independence Day. Well, Mondami said Independence Day is whatever you want it to be. Well, that's a classic communist tactic of remaking history. As again, Orwell said, if I own the present through an educational system, for example, I'll control your past. And if I control your past, I own your future. So if I'm teaching the kids that American independence means everything, I'm hijacking your history. I'm unhinging your history to diminish and ultimately destroy American identity. And by so doing, I'm going to own the future.
I thought that Mondani's speech was fascinating because the optics were so bad.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I mean, he's not an ugly guy. He's, charismatic. I mean, I don't find him that charismatic, but people find him charismatic, but just the optics of it were awful. It just looked dark and nasty and angry. And it's hard to imagine that that's going to appeal to a lot of Americans when we're kind of the experts at advertising, the amount of ads that we're watching since birth, and we know what appeals to us viscerally and what are the optics we like. And it seemed to me that was going entirely in the opposite direction. And that is a pretty clear indication of what communism is. A lot of darkness, a lot of ugliness, both externally and internally.
Yeah. Well, he was taking his finger and sticking it in Uncle Sam's eye, right? He had the picture of Washington in the background in an effort to hijack or to have some type of legitimacy while saying everything that Washington and the founding fathers and that American generations after generations of Americans created with their sweat and their blood is being thrown out the window. So I agree, absolutely. It was, in that respect, it was a horrible speech, but it was an alarming speech because he was saying, I don't care. I'm remaking your history right now, and there's nothing you can do about it.
We're hearing a lot of people, or I'm hearing this, saying, well, yeah, socialism is not that appealing, but who knows if these proposals aren't going to find some footing because AI is going to wipe out so many people's jobs. So we may need something like a universal basic income, which is something that people like Elon Musk, who's presumably not a communist, have been talking about. Does that concern you? That different things are lining up so that that more and more people will be inclined to say, yeah, I don't have work. I can't find work. Work has eliminated entire industries. So how are we going to be taken care of?
The immiseration of the proletariat, of which the Leninists, Marx and the Leninists spoke. I agree with that. And really, I would add to that, the LLMs, the large language models, are also going to be driven by Lenin, because the content that's going into the LLMs is going to be drawn from, if you will, dominant discourse today, and that's Leninist, right? If you're drawing your material...
Can you explain this? Can you explain what you mean by that Leninism is the dominant discourse? I mean, I think, it's surprising to me. What do you mean by that?
Sure. If you're hoovering up CNN, right, to provide the large language models are going out and searching, right, and although it's a complicated issue, they're basically vacuuming up our media, our books, for example, what folks are saying, podcasts, all of that. Well, if you own the ideas industry, right, then you're going to have obviously control or heavily influence in those large language models. And so if you're asking Chat a question or Grok a question, what's the response going to be? Well, it's going to be one which is colored by the folks who own the ideas industry.
Wow.
Really and that means what? And then your point, I think, is spot on. There is going to be unemployment, right? There are going to be a lot of folks who will be alienated because they've lost their jobs, and they'll be looking for dramatic political change in this situation. So, for my mind, both of those causes means our future is precarious.
Your book, America's 100 Years War, How to Win Against Communism, but it's there in the subtitle. You have a positive message too, and that's how I'd like to end our talk, because I don't want everyone to think it's all dire. We live in the greatest country in the history of the world, and also, look, insofar as we're fighting this, we're starting in a much better place than most people who fight totalitarian regimes are starting, right? You and I are speaking openly here. We both live in decent homes. We're not in a trench. We're not in a basement somewhere in the Warsaw Ghetto or something like that. So, but what is our way forward as Americans?
Learn from the past. We've been fighting 100 years war against communism, and it hasn't triumphed yet. And why didn't it triumph? Because American identity was very strong in the past. When American identity is strong, communism is weak. When communism is strong, American identity is weak. So in the past, what did we know? With our identity, we recognized, as Trump has called out, right, that communism is anti-American fundamentally. Americans see people as individuals. Communists see people as collectives, as groups. You're not Lee, obviously. You're a white man, obviously, of a particular class, all of those elements, and that determines your identity. Americans reject that. We believe we have rights that are given by God, and those rights cannot be taken away from us. And from that foundation, seeing people as individuals with rights, we have built a political system and institutions which respect liberty, freedom, the rule of law, free market economics, which, as you said, it's created the best political, economic, and social system that's ever existed in the greatest civilization, Western civilization, which has ever existed. When Americans recognize that, they can see that, of course, our identity is something for which to be supremely proud, and to recognize that if you're coming in to attack that, then it's you're anti-American fundamentally. You're rejecting the spirit of 1776 for something which is much darker and totalitarian. And Americans won't have it. I would also add to that, Lee, that there's an American spirit. Americans have a good head on their shoulders. We're kind of empirical folks, right? That look at situations, we look at things, we quantify things, and we see whether this is going to be positive for us as a people or whether it's not. And I think despite the dangers we've discussed today, again, Americans have a good head on their shoulders, and they're going to reject these promises. As Mandami is going to open his grocery stores, but they're going to fail. Mandami is going to crack down on billionaires, but he's going to drive many out. He's going to immiserate the people of New York City. Now, he doesn't care about that, but Americans looking at the situation are going to say this is not the right path to pursue, and we need to return to what the strength of our identity to reject this. So the message of the book is optimistic. Americans have defeated communism before. It's been a long war, and we can again if we remember who we are.
Brad Thayer, thank you. That's great. It reminds me of why dissidents are so important to this country, why people who have lived through communism, why people who have lived through totalitarian regimes are so important, because some of the times we're the fish who don't know the water is wet, right? We're here. We take, as we should take it for granted, because it's, God granted us these rights. But once we look around and realize that not all the world is like that, and history moves awfully quickly, and that's why it's so important to have dissidents telling us what the rest of the world looks like, and that's why it's so important to read Brad Thayer's brand new book. Brad, congratulations. Thanks so much for being here with us today on Roots, Rights, and Reason, and we'll see you all in our next episode. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Roots, Rights, and Reason. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share this episode, and visit americasfuture.net for our full library of podcasts. Until next time, remember that understanding our roots, defending our rights, and exercising our reason are essential to preserving the greatest country in the history of Earth. I'm Lee Smith. See you next time on Roots, Rights, and Reason.